Hello guys and welcome to the Pig Daily episode number 16. Number 16? Yes, it is number 16. It's the 6th of June 2016 and today we're going to actually be doing our first beginner basics episode, which is cool because there's been quite a few requests for some newbie friendly content, so I figured why not, let's go ahead and do it. It actually took me a really long time to kind of figure out what we're going to do today, but yeah, we're ready. I think we're ready, so it should be a good episode. So of course we've just had a couple days off on the weekend, so thanks for the patience there with the daily. And yeah, we had our qualifier yesterday for anyone who didn't tune in, and that was for the open qualifier for WCS ANZ. We got the first seed after winning a whole bunch of matches and getting a bunch of forfeits, which is it was pretty fun actually. We played a lot more ZVTs than we normally do, and we got to use pretty much the same builds we're using in our daily number 12, how to beat a stronger player, just because we weren't feeling too good with our macro game, and we kind of just went out there and did a lot of weird, aggressive Roach Ravager play, really fast muters into Roach Ravager timings. And that was actually really fun because there's just something so satisfying about dictating the pace of the game. And the upside of that is we now get the first seed from the open qualifiers, which makes us seed number 5, which means when we go through to the final qualifiers, we don't have to play anyone super good for a little while, which is awesome. We probably will have to play Ender in the quarterfinals and then Iagas in the semi-finals. So clear path up to there, which is pretty good. So yeah, so I've had a pretty good weekend. Played some Overwatch, chilled out a bit. Watched a movie called Predestination, which is so messed up. You guys should go watch it if you haven't already. But anyway, that's kind of my update on what's been going on with me. So let's dive on into today's daily. What are we going to be talking about? Beginner basics. Which aspect of beginner basics? Hopping into 1v1 for the first time. I was really torn, right, trying to prepare beginner basics topics because I see the game completely differently after playing, 50,000 games or however many games to someone who's new to the game. So for me to look at the basic things that I can kind of break down, all the little elements and all the basic things, it's just like really hard because I need to kind of reverse engineer my brain, open up all those streamlined processes and just be like, okay, let's actually look at these now. So I thought a good place to start would be, well, what about when you just first hop onto ladder or you're first hopping into 1v1? You're very new to the game. And I kind of just sat there in a custom game pretending I was a new player and thinking about all the little things which I normally take for granted. And that's kind of what we're going to do today. And after kind of doing that a few times and running through the early game, I thought about it and I was like, okay, what's the most important thing for a new player to pick up on? What's the most important things for them to learn? So we're going to have a couple different rules we're applying today. The main thing is we're going to be talking about your main focus when you first start out. So you're not going to need an advanced build order. You don't need to have some memorized technical, it's 17 supply, do this, 18 supply, do that. You don't need to. As you progress, you want to start trying to get refined in that direction. But all we're going to have is a very generic game plan, a sort of general order that we do things. And this is going to apply to all 3 races. We're going to show it as Protoss, but it's going to apply to all races. And the main core of what we're doing while following that game plan is constant worker production and trying not to get supply blocked. So that's, if you want to break it down to its most basic, that's all we're talking about today. Generic game plan, building workers, and not getting supply blocked. So let's dive into game and let's actually go through everything little bit by little bit. And we're going to try and explain as many processes that go on as possible. And we're also going to talk about all the little things that happen in between, as well as other things you need to keep in mind for later on as you improve. So we're here. Now, when a game first starts, the first thing you always want to be doing is building workers. Alright, so you always want to be building workers. Now the first thing you do is you hotkey your Nexus. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about hotkeys. I will just pause really quickly. If you need any help with hotkeys, go and check out my my fundamentals episode, which was daily number 10, I believe. I'm just going to check here on my second monitor. Number 10, yeah. Number 10, and there's information there about hotkeys and mechanics and all that sort of stuff, so just go Google or type into YouTube fundamentals, Pig Daily number 10, fundamental mechanics. We're not going to talk about that. So back into game, because otherwise we'd spend all day talking about absolutely everything over and over again. So you just keep building probes, and with every race, about 14 supply, you always want to be building a pylon. Or an overlord or a depot, depending on your race. Very basic stuff. and that's going to stop us from getting supply blocked for too long. After that, you always want to be starting out with a defensive building, a building which helps you build units. For Protoss, that's going to be a gateway. For Zerg, it's a spawning pool. For Terran, it's a barracks. This is just the generic game plan you should be following. And you want to also get yourself a gas, and then send that probe back to mine. This is very simple stuff, and all we're doing is we're trying to get used to a cycle of going back and just constantly adding on a few more probes. We always want to have 2 or 3 probes queued up on our Nexus. Always want to be doing that. Now, you also... Okay, so our gas is finishing. So even before that finishes, we can start throwing some guys onto that gas. And then you want to be going for... You always want to be watching that supply as well on the top right. And you just want to be going, okay, let's put down another pylon. Now, already... we're kind of following an order. We're doing some things which are kind of nice, but we already have something which we can talk about to make things a bit more efficient here in this early game. And that first thing we're going to be talking about is going to be queuing up. So making sure we're using shift as often as possible to queue up actions. So right here, even in the early game, the first thing we're going to be doing, queuing up some probes. And as soon as we get to 14 supply, we're going to be building that pylon. But each time we build a structure, we want to be queuing our worker back to mining using shift. Already just adding this basic action is going to save you so much time as a new player, like a ridiculous amount of time. So keep queuing up probes, keep queuing up probes. And then we're going to do the exact same thing with our gateway. Now also notice we can actually pull this probe even before we have the minerals, and we can just do that. So the idea here is as soon as you put the structure down and click back to your minerals, you can go back to doing other things. We can go back to queuing up probes. We can think about what we do next. We can add a gas. And trying to get all of that done. Now remember, with each race, you can follow this exact same game plan. There's obviously going to be slight changes here and there. But generally, it's pretty good. So we're keeping an eye on that supply. We're saying, okay, whenever that gets pretty close, we always want to have a bit of a supply gap. Make sure we never actually hit the supply cap. Let's put some guys on gas. Keep building probes. Keep building probes. Pretty basic plan so far. It's not going too crazy. But what you want to do around next is you always want to just kind of build some fighting units out of your basic thing. Just a few ones to keep you safe. With Protoss, you want to build a cybernetics core. If you're Zerg, you want to start getting Zergling speed and then a Roach Horn a little bit after. If you're Terran, you might want to get a factory, or if you're going by, get a tech lab and start getting some stim upgrades, some combat shields, that sort of stuff. But after we've got this and we're just building a few generic fighting units, we're just queuing up workers, we're keeping an eye on that supply, the next thing you want to be doing is expanding. And you should naturally, as long as you're being constantly building workers, you should have enough money to do that around now. So remember, we can do it ahead of time, we can send the worker down, but we're just doing it once we have the money, which is what you'll probably do at first, and queue that worker up to go back. So keep queuing up probes. Something that's very important, that's Protoss specific, is of course to get your warp gate research. And just keep building probes, but once again, watch that supply. Very basic focus here. It's literally just building things constantly. However, when you first start out, this is the most important thing you need to do. The next thing we're going to need to do is, we're still just sitting on one gas. Don't take the extra gas. That's the biggest mistake new players make, and even experienced players. And we can say, okay, so what do we do next? Well, next we want to be adding some production. So if you're Zerg, this would take the form of adding an early third hatchery. Even if you're not planning to use it straight away, you need it to help build units. If you're Terran, it's building a few barracks. And if we're Protoss, we're going to build a few gateways. Now notice, whenever we build new structures, so new Nexus, we're going to add this to our hotkey. So we go Shift, we've got it on 7, but whatever your hotkey is, Shift 7. So now both our Nexus are on the same hotkey. Gateways, Shift 5, and now we've got all 5 gateways on the one hotkey. And this is very important. Now notice, we're almost supply blocked again, so we've got to put pylons down. And this, notice we're putting down 2 pylons at this point. This is an important topic, as basic as it may seem. Basically, building pylons, building overlords, building depots is one of the most important things in StarCraft. And people will tell you all sorts of rules or all sorts of different ways of dealing with it. And there's a lot of good things people say out there. The number one thing though is people say, just never get supply block, just constantly building them. But people often find it very hard to get in the rhythm of when to build them and how many to build them. So we're hitting a point in the game right now where we're starting to get that natural expansion finish. We're about to send a whole bunch of workers down there. Basically, your economy is growing much faster. Your production is growing much faster. And soon you're going to be building units off not just one gateway and one nexus, but 2 nexus and 4 gateways. That's more than double the production. So already, very early into the game, you can see, well, if our production's doubled, we're going to need more than double supply buildings, more than double the pylons going down. And this is very typical. If you're ever doing a normal economic build like this, where you're taking your natural very quickly, taking your third very quickly, which you should always be doing, your production just ramps up so fast. So it's really important for you to kind of go, okay, very quickly, you need to start building more pylons. Now, I was saying before, watch in that top right-hand corner of your screen. Watch up here, watch that supply count. You really want to be watching that and keeping an eye on that. And the idea is you have a supply gap there. Remember, we mentioned that idea of you never want to actually butt into what you hit, butt into it, because the moment you hit it, that means you're supply blocked. The thing is, in the early stages, you're comfortable with maybe being 30 out of 40 supply, right? So you've got 10 free supply. And you're like, that's a really comfortable gap. That's great. However, as you build more units faster, a 10 supply gap is suddenly not nearly as big or as safe as it used to be. So once you get to say 60 supply, you definitely want to be at least out of 80, at least a 20 supply gap. So you're already doubling that supply gap. The idea of that's kind of my comfort zone. Anything less than that, I'm thinking about building more pylons. I'm thinking about building more depots or more overlords. Once you get to say 120 supply, you want to be at 120 out of 160 or 170. You go up to a 40 or 50 supply gap. Once you get to 130, 140 supply, you should always be out of 200 supply every single time. So because your production ramps up so quickly, you need to just start building vast amounts of these structures. Some people like to say the rule of build 1 pylon or overlord or depot per base that you have mining every kind of 20, 30 seconds, every cycle. When you're first starting out, your cycles are going to be really disorganized. So I think we just want to kind of learn it a little bit more naturally. You're just kind of getting used to just start adding more pylons. As we ramp up and just try to get a feel for it, start putting down 2 pylons at a time, then 3 or 4 pylons at a time as you feel you need them. And you'll find you won't get supply blocked whatsoever. Excuse me. So let's dive back into game. And what do we want to be doing from here? So remember, no matter what else is happening, queuing up probes. At this point, we're not clicking on our nexus. Wherever we are, we can just select the nexus hotkey and add those probes. Now we see that our main base is all red. So let's grab both our nexus hotkeys and right click on the minerals. Make sure you're changing the rally points so any new probes coming out will rally to the new base. And we also want to transfer excess workers. So we can see we're 27 out of 11, so we want to grab about 11 workers. Yeah, that's about 11. Send them down to the natural. And if it's just 17 or 18, that's fine. Doesn't matter if it's red. Now, keep queuing up probes. Let's keep building pylons. Oh, we've got heaps of supply free, so maybe it's not that important to build those. So in between those actions, you want to do the regular parts of your build. So keep building probes, keep building pylons, but now we've got our warp gates. So we're turning our gateways into warp gates. And once you've got your production up, you want to be constantly producing out of it. So you've got this idea of, we've started out with kind of just, so let's pause for a second. You've started out with just one action, but it very quickly starts to kind of add extra actions in there, and there's lots of different things going on. So I guess we'll keep playing just for a second while I talk about this. We don't need to go on camera. So notice each time we box units, we're adding those to our hotkey, but adding probes, adding pylons, adding probes, adding pylons. But at this point in the game, we need to start doing other things. There's a Zergling in our base. Oh, we've got too many probes. We need gas. All things start to pile up very quickly. And this is where we need to start getting the idea of juggling tasks. You always hear people talk about multitasking in StarCraft. What we're going to talk about is 2 things here. 1, the macro cycle, and 2, kind of juggling and bouncing between different things. And a lot of people feel like it's very stressful, and how the hell do you handle all these tasks at once? And what you've got to kind of recognize is multitasking isn't necessarily a thing. It's just the ability to quickly bounce between things because you've got a good plan in your head and you know what you've got to do next, as well as having repetitive tasks, which you can do kind of without even thinking about them. So first of all, we have at the core of juggling as we have our macro. The things we need to do at home, building our economy, building workers, building pylons. That's at the absolute core of what we need to be doing, right? So we've got, these are the most important things, especially when you're beginning, but throughout all of StarCraft, you've got to keep doing those things. And the thing is that actually changes as time goes on, but it started out just as probes, pylons, right? That's all we needed to do. So we were constantly going probes, pylons, but then we go, okay, we've got to build a gateway at the start. Okay. So in between building probes and pylons, we do the other parts of our build. We go, oh, it's time to grab a gateway. It's time to grab a gas. Build some probes, build some pylons. It's time to take a nexus. So you're kind of bouncing between everything that goes on with your regular game plan and these sort of mindless, somewhat mindless tasks behind it, that it's just maintaining your macro. Now, there is decision making that goes into that and practice and all sorts of things. But just getting into the rhythm, first of all, it's not this vastly mental strategic process. In StarCraft, the strategy is sometimes hidden underneath a layer of mechanics. You need to get used to maintaining things before you can reach that. Same with any real-time game or any real-time competition. You can be an absolutely bloody savant when it comes to football strategy. You can win, you know, some fantasy football league and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't mean you can go out there and kick the ball around. And StarCraft's the same with an FPS. There's great strategic depth in Counter-Strike, but if you can't click on someone's head, you're pretty boned. It's just not going to happen. So just needed to cover that up, because there's always someone who's like, I thought this was a strategy game. You just got to do things that are mindless in a strategy game. No, it's fine. It's fine. So we're talking here about this idea of juggling and this idea of the macro cycle. Now, what we're also talking about was how the macro cycle changes. So we're about to hop back into game, and remember that early on it was just probes and pylons, but now we're saying, hey, we've got a bunch of gateways up. We're adding building units into that macro cycle. And this is what you always want to have as your core. So you're kind of going probes or SCVs, you know, or drones and overlords. So probes and pylons, SCVs and depots, drones and overlords, probes and pylons. You're just going through those, and then you start building units as well. It's a little bit different for Zerg because their drones and their units build out of the same production facilities. But with Protoss, Terran, it's very straightforward. Just constantly building Marines, Marauders, constantly building Stalkers and Adepts, these basic units while doing that. And a little bit later on, we're also going to hit a point where we actually have as many probes as we want. We don't need any more economy. And that's when we actually cut probes out of our macro cycle, and it's just building pylons and just building units. So this is something we've got to keep in mind. So we're going to look at the next minute or two, and I'm going to try and mention, okay, macro cycle time. So I'm going to say macro cycle, and that's when we bounce back from doing our build things to just go probes, pylons, and that sort of stuff. So let's go back into game, and this is the rhythm you want to start getting used to. So okay, macro cycle, probes, pylons. Let's go build some pylons down here. Units. That's a macro cycle. So now that our macro cycle's done, we can think about doing other things. Okay, we've got plenty of probes. Once your natural's saturated, you can grab gases. You can grab all your gases. Okay, so macro cycle, build probes, build pylons, and let's try and warp in some units. Okay, cool. So we're getting used to this sort of rhythm that's going on now because we're bouncing between our tasks. At this point, we go, okay, we just finished a macro cycle, let's put guys on gas. We've got some spare APM for a little bit. We don't need to be doing anything. And now we can say, okay, we've got way too many guys, let's go take a third nexus. Macro cycle time, build probes. We don't really need pylons, so we can skip that this time. Build adepts. Okay, so we're just keeping this unit production going. So what else are we thinking about now? We're thinking to ourselves, what do we do next? And already we're going far beyond what most beginner players are going. We're taking our third base. Our natural's already saturated. What the hell is going on? It's almost like we've built an economy. This is why this is such a great way to start out the game when you're first playing, because this is going to give you the foundation without you having the knowledge of what unit count is what, and what beats what, and what's perfect against what in what situation. You don't need all that advanced knowledge. What we're giving you is a basic foundation so that you can build your core economy and then learn the game quite naturally from there. We're not saying at exactly this supply you need to build this. We're saying here's a rough order of, not taking your gases too fast, expanding pretty fast, getting some units to defend generic aggression. That's it. That's good. But we're going to give you this solid economic foundation so you can explore and experiment. So if you play a few games, we're just playing against an AI, by the way, against a medium AI. You just always start out against AI your first few games, then hop onto ladder. And you can just kind of get used to being comfortable with this, but then you can hop into a game and you can die to Dark Templar. You can die to Cloaked Banshees or some early attack that you don't know how to deal with. And it doesn't mean you need to change up your entire plan drastically, but you can start to say things like, oh, you know what, Dark Templar hit me at 5 minutes, I'm going to start getting an Observer out by then, or some Photon Cannons, some form of detection. You can start to make adjustments as you go on, but the big thing we often see is when someone starts out and they don't have a video like this to watch, or they don't follow one of the other good guides out there on how to begin playing, they've got about 12 workers for the first 10 minutes in the game. So no matter what they choose to build and what decisions they make, they're just going to lose because the opponent has a 30 or 50 worker economy. They're mining 3, 4, 5 times as much, and they're just overwhelming them every single time. Doesn't matter what choices you make. So what you always want to start out with in StarCraft is your first 5, 10, maybe even 15 games is all about getting a solid core down, getting that fundamental basis. So what are we going to talk about now is, well, we're getting to that point, we're taking a third base. What's the plan? We haven't talked about what the actual game plan was here. So this is something you need to decide for yourself before you start laddering. As you say, I always want to start with a core of basic units, because you build those early, they'll keep you safe, and then they're still going to form the core of your army. So you want to say to yourself, okay, we're going to follow this economic plan that PiG's laid out, but we also want to have lots of Marines and Marauders. If you're Zerg, lots of Zerglings and Roaches. If you're Protoss, lots of Adepts and Stalkers. That's the core of your army. And you always want to, when you start out, choose just 1 or at most 2 advanced units to complement your composition. You don't want to try and build all the different units in the tech tree. You want to say, you know what? I'm just going to go Ling, Roach, and then I'm going to add Hydralisks to their tech. Or in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to say, look, Stalkers, Adepts, you know what? We're going to add Immortals in. Immortals, pretty generic, powerful unit. We just add those in, and it's going to allow us to stay focused in terms of how we build our economy, how we build our production, and really just focus on one core army rather than trying to overthink the situations too much. So let's dive back into game and let's get that production going. I've really got to click on the right scene for once. I think I should move those around so I stop clicking on that. So you macro cycle. Build probes, build pylons. Let's add this nexus to our hotkey, because we saw this natural is way oversaturated. So let's select nexus, rally, and let's grab a whole bunch of workers and send those down to this one. So we see now we pulled away, so there's 17 there, which is fine. Build probes, build pylons. You see, wow, this is actually a lot of probes, so we can probably take the gas straight away as well. Okay, cool. But let's not forget the macro cycle. Keep building units, keep building probes. And as you get the money around this point, you start to think about your transition. So in this case, we're going to say, okay, every game we're going to build 2 factories. Now this could be you building a starport or 2, or a starport with a reactor to get medevacs with your bio. It could just be building a Hydralisk Den as Zerg. For us, we're deciding, you know what, let's just get 2 robotics facilities. So keep building probes, keep building Adepts and Stalkers, and you're just sticking to this kind of generic cycle in which you are doing things. Excuse me. So let me take a look at my notes. So what are we going to be talking about next? Alright, so keep building probes, keep building pylons. Oh, we're under attack. Now, when you're under attack, you just want to select your whole army and attack move on the ground. So we're interrupted by that, that's fine. You don't want to do any fancy micro, you just want to A move. So A, left click. Now if you guys get stuck on the ramp, you can box, move forward, and then A move. Or you can just select your whole army, move forward, and then A move. But that's basically as far as you ever want to micro. Now, we want to do another macro cycle, but we realize at this point we've got way too many workers. Once you hit your third base being saturated, this is where you want to stop as a beginner player. That's as many workers as you'll ever need. So this is that point we were talking about where we say to ourselves, whoa, we have enough economy. Macro cycle used to be probes, pylons, army units. Get rid of the probes. Now it's just pylons and army units. That's all we need to do with our macro. And this is why you start hitting a point in the game where you actually don't need to look at your base as much. All you really need to do is take new bases and kind of transition workers as your minerals run out and move them to it. That's all you need to do from this point in the game. So it makes the game much more focused on the fighting once you build your early economy. So when you're first starting out, you want to think of the game in two phases. The first phase is you building an economy, building units, building up your tech and everything, kind of just defending. And the second stage is then, hey, my economy is built, I've got a big army, let's go kill my opponent. I can focus on my army more at that point, start to learn how to engage or micro and that sort of stuff. And you can start thinking about those aspects. However, even though you finish building probes, remember your mineral patches do run out quite fast in this game. So you've got to keep taking Nexus. It's just only there to transition. In this case, we overbuilt probes a bit, any overbuilt probes, but also just the probes as our main runs out, as our natural runs out. We're actually about to hit a very important point in game as well, which we'll mention. So we said, okay, we need to keep building Nexus so that we've got somewhere to mine. And if you've got lots of money, there's nothing wrong with literally just doing this. Build base, build base, build base. I guarantee you, if more players just built units like that, no Fs given, they would have much higher win rates. So let's build some Immortals. We can rally those down there. Let's build some more units. And we can see, okay, these bases are way oversaturated. Now, even before your new bases are finished, you can already add these all to your hotkey, rally them all to the new base. We're not building probes though, and we can start to transition workers. So we've hit that important point past 8 minutes. Once you hit 8 minutes into the game, your main base will always half run out of resources. So you want to pull workers away, leaving about 8 workers, and send those to your new one. Likewise, at 11 minutes, the same will happen for your natural. We can see these patches are down to about 300 minerals. Two and a bit minutes, and we'll have to transfer out of that base as well. Now here we've got some excess workers, so let's grab those. And we can just keep taking new bases like that. So at this point, all we're doing is building units, queuing up these Immortals, heaps of units. We've got heaps of Nexus going down, just so we've got places to transition workers to later on. Build some more pylons to make sure we're fully supplied. Something we realize though is even though we've been pretty consistently building units, we're still floating a hell of a lot of money. And this is where you want to be thinking about, okay, do we actually have enough production? If we're spending pretty consistently off our structures, we're still floating lots of money, it means we don't have enough production. And this is where you want to come up with just a general rule for how much stuff do I want? So if you are managing to make it up to this 3 base economy, you want to be having about 8 gateways is usually fine, but you can make 10, 11 gateways just to be safe. And that'll seem like a lot at first, but remember, it's always better to have a bit extra. So if you ever forget to spend while you're busy fighting or defending somewhere, you can always then spend that money and just keep those units churning out. So same for Terran, 8, 10 barracks, something like that'll be great if you're very Marine Marauder focused. As Zerg, your bases are your production, so you don't need to worry about this as much. However, a lot of players when you're first starting out will really not be so good with your lava injects. That's a kind of difficult mechanic to get used to. So for those players, you can always put down a couple of macro hatcheries once you've got that 3 base economy up. When you're first starting out, putting down 2 or even 3 macro hatcheries, completely fine. So in this particular game, we're saying, well, we've only got 4 gateways left from the early game. Let's dive back into game and let's get that production up. And because we're building it so late, we've already got lots of money. Let's use that shift key, build gateways. Building your production really quickly like this is very important. So I don't even know how many gateways that is. What is that? That's like 9 extra gateways. This is like excessive. But like I said, it's better to have more than less. So we're going to control click the gateways, shift add those into our hotkey. Continuing to build Immortals. And, oh, what's this? We're at 200 supply. Once again, our macro cycle has become even simpler. When you hit this point in the game, you had build probes, build pylons, build units. Now literally all you have to worry about, because you're at 200 supply, you're at max supply, is building units. You only have a single macro task that you actually need to look back at your base and kind of cater to. The only other thing is like maynarding workers around, kind of transferring your workers between your bases. That's pretty damn easy to do. So it's kind of exciting. Excuse me. It's exciting when you get to this point in the game because you don't have to look back at your base as much, and you really get to start experimenting with other things. As you get more advanced, you start to do things like counterattacks, while attacking with your main army, doing drops, all sorts of different things because you've got extra actions that are free, and you should be much more comfortable with those. Of course, we're nearing the end of the scenario now, so let's take a look through my notes quickly. And we are going to kind of talk through, attacking at the end and then a few other things. So if you've got any questions, do shout them out using the @x5_pig tag in chat. And I do appreciate any questions you guys can ask, or even just suggestions saying, you know what, I actually found when I was coaching my friend that this is very important. You didn't mention it. Shout it out. So if you guys have any suggestions, please do shout it out. Let me just take a quick look at my notes. We've talked about saturating the bases, when to stop probes. We talked about when to move workers on from new bases, and really that constant focus of just getting used to that macro cycle. Remember what we said? Just constant work production, building pylons. Just that part of the macro cycle is going to be the main thing you struggle with at first. So that stuff we talked about in the first 5 to 10 minutes. But your aim is always going to be to kind of get up to a big maxed out army and then go for an attack. So while you guys are asking those questions, we'll finish off this scenario in terms of how you should be playing your first 1v1 games. So let's unpause here, and you can see we're actually very high in supply. Let's build some pylons. You should always have pylons at your base. A little Protoss specific tip is notice how the pylon color changes. You always want it to be teal, like that. If we put it one space further north, it would be a slow warp in pylon. But if it's here, units can warp in much quicker there because it's next to a nexus. So notice now we are maxed out. So we've maxed out at about 10 minutes 30 here, even while explaining many different steps. So if I was doing this just on my own, doing the same build order, but I was macroing a little bit faster at my own rate, I could definitely max out probably at about 8 minutes 30, 9 minutes. And once you're maxed out, it's time to attack. So keep boxing new units, always add to your army. Box, shift 2, always. So now using our number 2 army group, this is just my special setup. You guys can do it however you want. We're just going to A, move our units up here. So A, left click, and you do not want to do any fancy micro. The number one mistake newer players make is trying to do lots of fancy micro with their units, and the units end up just not being effective as a result. So let's just A move to our opponent's base. Now, the mistake most players make here is they just kind of attack move right. They say, oh, his base is here, attack move. And what we're going to notice is if you watch the army as it moves out, it's going to spread out in this kind of long, drawn-out column. Have you ever... You see an army marching in a column? You never see an army attacking in a column. Why? Because it's bloody stupid. You're attacking with only a few units at a time. So instead of doing that, always attack move outside your opponent's base, wait for your units to ball up, and then attack move. Oh, get out of here, buddy. Get out of here. Alright, so we see... Oh, doesn't have that base yet. Let's go attack move. Now, this is where you want to do the only micro you ever do. All our units are actually getting some decent attacks off here. But you can move command, attack move. Move command, attack move. This is essentially... Sorry. The game sounds are a bit loud. This is essentially stutter stepping. We're just doing it at a basic level. Move forward, attack command. And you can just let your units do the rest. One thing to be careful of is a lot of people go, okay, attack move. And they'll go like, okay, attack move. Now notice all the units, because I accidentally clicked on a drone, they were all just trying to move towards that drone. And only once the drone died did they start attacking. So a lot of players accidentally do that when they're starting out in big engagements. And you'll see their whole army kind of move commanding, trying to get at like this single unit that's sitting at the back. And everything just kind of falls apart. So, that's cool. The computer's dead. We'll just let him die. GG's. GG's. Alright. So, oh, by the way, guys, we do have an Abatha giveaway today as well. I forgot to mention that. So if you're interested in getting an Abatha co-op code, we're going to be giving those away first 4 shows this week. They're the last Abatha codes we have to give away. So hang around just after we finish questions and we will give those out. So let's summarize quickly before going to questions. So we talked about constantly building workers. We talked about constantly building pylons. Once we have our production up, constantly building out of our production buildings, our gateways or our barracks or whatever. Gonna arouse the stream there, man. Actually, I think my chair's blocking it.
Oh, boys.
I don't want to get banned on Twitch. I better block my pantsless housemate there. Mom, why don't you wear pants around the house, God damn it?
We didn't have pants.
Constantly build out of your production buildings. Follow the general order we went through. So go back and watch it again and write it down. So if you're watching this video, I know I said it's not a super strict build order, but at the same time, if you are actually a newer player and you're wanting to follow this way of improving when you're first starting on a ladder, go back, watch the video and write it down, or even better, click on the video description below, go to the Team Liquid thread. This is assuming you're watching on YouTube, not live, and there will be notes in there. So check the Team Liquid thread. You can find the post and it will have all the notes we need for this, but also just watch the video and note down the order. So, remember it's like, okay, always go for your gateway, then your gas, then you get your nexus down, then you add a few more gateways, so you add your production, and kind of just make sure you have that list down in that order, and you try to do that all while also keeping your money low. So this is something we also didn't touch on too much, but at the end I want to say, like, well, if you're doing this, you might be kind of struggling and thinking, how well am I doing? You're like, you might think I'm doing as well as Pig was doing. Remember I said I could easily max out at 9 minutes with this. So if you're just starting out, you want to say, well, how do I benchmark myself? I check out my replay afterwards and I say, at what time in the game, what game timer do I max out? So you check that game timer just above the mini map down here, and you say, what time did I max out? And I think as a new player, a good challenge would probably be saying, I want to max out by 12 minutes. When you're very first time doing it against like a very easy AI that doesn't really do anything to distract you, if you can max out by 12 minutes, that's awesome your first time around. And you want to steadily kind of work that forwards as you improve and be trying to max out closer and closer to kind of 9 minutes. But that's not a goal in of itself. That's just a way to kind of benchmark your progress. So if you're not very close to that, it's taking you till 16 minutes until you get there. You can always watch a replay and you can look through and you can be like, am I constantly building workers? Am I keeping my money low? If you're floating 3,000 minerals very early in the game, well, you're just not putting your money into building your economy fast. You're not spending your money fast enough. So you just need to speed up the rate at which you're building your structures, building your workers. You just need to get used to doing everything faster. So that can all vary quite a lot. So always check the benchmark. That's going to be a really great way to kind of tell exactly how well you're doing. And try to refine the build order while constantly getting that macro cycle down. It's the core of all StarCraft play, especially as a beginner. If you can get a good macro cycle down, if you can get used to juggling, doing what we said, where you do all your regular parts of your build, reacting, microing, doing everything that goes on, but you always do that around your macro cycle. So every 30 seconds or so, you bounce back, you queue up 2 probes per nexus, put down a few pylons, build some units out of your gateways, and then you go back to doing everything else that needs to be done. So getting used to bouncing between those will take a little bit of time, but once you get there, it feels absolutely amazing. All right, guys, so that's going to finish up the show. We're going to go into question time, and hopefully we've got a few questions there. We actually do today. That's nice. Jockle says, Pig, maybe you can say that on 4 to 5 bases, you can also start to add more higher tech as Protoss. Example, have a total of 4 robos and Stargates. Potentially, Jockle. As time goes on, you definitely can add more tech structures. However, when you're first starting out, I think players having 2 or 3, like having 2 robotics, building immortals, as well as like 10, 12 gateways, more than enough. Definitely there's other things that can be added in. As you improve, you'll start to do things like add forges for upgrades, add a Twilight Council to get the attack speed upgrade for adepts, or the blink upgrade for stalkers. There's all sorts of things you can start to add in there, but generally, because we want your focus to be very simple when you first start out, and this is still a very good way to play, don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm saying, this is the noob way to play, I'm going to make the game easy for you. Like, no, the game is still very challenging. But building Adepts and Stalkers, or just building Lings and Roaches as the core of your army, and then just adding that higher tech unit, the Immortals, or the Hydras, or the Medivacs, to buffer that out. That's already, I think, more than enough for most new players to handle. And I feel like the idea of getting more robos or stargates is a distraction. So what you should be focusing on is just building consistently out of those structures. If you trade armies with your opponent, you both have a big engagement, just rebuild off the production facilities that you're used to using, that you know how to using, and get in that rhythm. And I think getting in that rhythm and kind of getting used to your macro cycle, kind of amping up in terms of unit production as the game goes on, and amping down in terms of economy, in terms of probes and pylons, getting used to that is much more important than having a more advanced composition. And that's kind of the starting step here. As time goes on, though, you can definitely move that further and kind of get more complicated with that. Squanto says, Pig, remember in this game, it's often better to be fast than super accurate. My friend, when I said grab 8 workers, he would make sure to grab exactly 8 workers, when really he should have just been moving on to the next task. That's a really good point from Squanto. That is exactly the kind of suggestion I wanted. So let's go back into game and talk about that one quickly. Let me turn that sound back on. So the idea was, oh, my base is running out of resources. Let's say this one. So I was saying leave about 8 workers there. Notice how I was just boxing workers and going to the new base. Notice just box and go to the next one. So being quick, exactly like Squanto says, is more important than what a lot of players will do. Like he was saying, his friend would go, okay, I need to take, if there's 16, I want to leave 8 here because half the mineral patches are about to run out. He'd be like, okay, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is just wasting time. That's a huge waste of time. You should always just try and get as close to what you're trying to do. If you try to grab 8 workers, you accidentally grab all 16, yeah, it might be worth leaving half of them there and trying to select again. But you don't need to be as exact as you might be used to. So that's a fantastic suggestion from Squanto. Thank you very much. Choc Malification says, Pig, are upgrades and scouting considered advanced, or is that also part of your notes? So this is your very first time starting out, and that's actually something I forgot to talk about, which I was meant to. It was in my notes as like something you're meant to do later on. So very good suggestion there. After your first few games just focusing on this, you want to start doing a few steps, which is getting a little bit of map control. You want to put a unit outside their base so that you can see when they move across the map. You want to send a worker through their base at the start just to get used to seeing where your opponent spawned, kind of just getting used to looking at their base and getting a feel for it, even if you don't really understand the information. But that should only really come after your first 5 or 10 games at least. You really want to focus on, even after your first 20 games. When I've coached brand new beginner players, it really is something which scouting is advanced, and it's completely unnecessary because they don't know what to do with the information. I know I sure as hell didn't when I was starting out. And because they need to put so much focus into just doing their basic macro tasks that there's just, even if they have scouting, they're not going to notice something coming across the map. So that's something which definitely is like the next step down the line. Once you get a basic feel for your macro, you start to scout a bit more, have some units on the map to see when attacks are coming. So that's kind of the next step. And we'll definitely be talking about all of that stuff more in future beginner basics episodes. All right, so one last question here, I think. Excuse me. So a good note from Cool Mum is something that made him improve, is he says something that helped him improve a lot was just reminding himself that he had to constantly do things and make decisions with urgency in StarCraft. This wasn't a game where he could just sit there and slowly think it out. The only slow thinking and calmly weighing up situations in StarCraft happens between games. It happens after the game when you're kind of thinking, what the hell just happened? And you open up your replay and you're like, I should have done this here. And actually, I could have done this here. In game, you don't have time for that slow, deliberate thought. It's all about make a decision and go with it. It's all about confidence and decisiveness in the action. All right, last question here from B Muffin. He says, focus on attack moving. I was teaching my brother a bit and we would right click on things he wanted to kill. Also generally using hotkeys. Yep, so in terms of hotkeys, yes, check out the fundamental mechanics episode. We don't talk too much about it, but you should just always be using your hotkeys. Always, always, always. We didn't talk about that too much today, but that is definitely very important. And as B Muffin says, and we're kind of touching on it before, always attack move on the ground. Every time you move army units, don't right click. And in a fight, newer players always just right click their army on the units they want to kill. And we actually, like, it's a really bad because your whole army, like we said, they all try and go for that one unit, and if they can't reach it, they'll just headbutt around in a battle being like, let me through, man! And you can end up with almost your entire army not attacking. So your army is almost always more effective when you just attack move on the ground, and that will help you be much more effective. All right, guys, so that's going to finish up today's session. I do want to say a big thanks to everyone for hanging out and the support. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Shout out any suggestions, comments, questions, or feedback in the comment section below. Ciao. Thanks for hanging out, guys. So don't forget to hug a cactus, lick a watermelon, and of course, punch a walrus in the cankle. That's all for now, guys. Goodbye and good night.